Welcome, everyone, to this wonderful gala reading. I'm thrilled and delighted to have Anne-Marie Macari and Thomas Lux with us this evening. You're in for a real treat. And it's a very special moment for me to introduce my dear friend and classmate from Sarah Lawrence, Mary Cornish. I'm not going to even talk about her winning the Field Poetry Prize for her wonderful book, Red Studio, which is on sale in the bookstore. I'm not going to mention that. But I can only tell you that one of the great privileges of my time at Sarah Lawrence was sitting down at a table over a cup of coffee with Mary Cornish and having her just look at one of my poems and talk to me about it. I learned so very much from her, and I am so grateful to her generosity and her kindness, and she is just an exquisite poet. It's my great pleasure to introduce Mary Cornish to you, and she'll be introducing our poets this evening. Thanks.
Such a mutual admiration society here. Can you all hear me? So much shorter. Am I popping my peas? Right from the eyebrows up. I first met Anne-Marie Macari and Tom Lux at Sarah Lawrence College, where Anne-Marie and I were students together and Tom was teaching. Now, here we are about a decade later in Palm Beach with its palm trees, ibis, pink stucco. The reunion seems both surreal and perfectly natural, as what brings us together again is poetry. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce these friends and poets to you tonight. This year, Autumn House published Anne-Marie's third collection of poems entitled She Heads into the Wilderness, a fierce yet tender look at the earth from the Bible's Eden to our own blessed and beleaguered world. In these pages, we discover that words are still at the center of paradise. Anne-Marie writes, and this will just be an excerpt, "The words were ambrosia, a bowl of wild strawberries. You said you knew where some grew and had picked them right in New York City, the size of red tears, vowels of paradise here in a bowl on the balcony. You said you knew where some grew and they were hidden and wild at the same time in the city. Tonight we're gathered together in this room as if we were gathered together in conversation on that balcony, drawn by words as ambrosia, the vowels of paradise. Given the power of poetry, who knows what will happen at this reading? How we might be seduced or transformed. Some of us came to this conference to study and write. Some may imagine they came only to listen. We may or may not think of ourselves as poets, but let me warn you, no one is safe. One day, a substitute teacher entered Anne-Marie's 10th grade class and read Walt Whitman aloud. Now she reads to us from her own work. Her poem, Ivory Cradle, opens with this line, "The air smells of what's coming, something sweet and cold." This is what was coming. Her first book, Ivory Cradle, won the APR Honickman First Book Prize in Poetry. Her second, Gloryland, was called A Breathtaking Revelation in the Female Body. As a fellow poet and as a woman, let me say here how grateful I am for these poems. In 2005, Anne-Marie won the James Dickey Award for Poetry from 5 Points magazine. On the one hand, Whitman's words hanging in the atmosphere. On the other hand, 3 highly praised books of her own. What is there about poetry that can send us on such a trajectory? In one of her poems, Anne-Marie describes the light of Enunciation as it comes through glass. In another, light presses through a tree, announcing itself, coming through. And this, in part, is the way her poems come to us, with a spirit that presses through and enters. Yet Tony Hoagland suggests Anne-Marie's subject is blood knowledge. In fact, her work in Gloryland has been called sumptuously visceral. I would point out that in Anne-Marie's glorious and urgent world, the heart is a muscle. It was with that heart as muscle that Anne-Marie has pursued her own life as a poet, dedicating herself to the craft years after hearing those poems of Whitman's. Of that early encounter, Anne-Marie has said, "I'm not sure what happened to me, but something in hearing those words, his rhythms, his imaginative language just swept me up, and I thought right then that I wanted to write poems." She ran out and bought a notebook. As we listen to her, we too will be unsure what happens as we are swept up. Words as ambrosia, the vowels of paradise. Ladies and gentlemen, Anne-Marie Macari.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, Miles, and everyone here. It's a joy to be here, and it's a particular honor for me to be reading with Tom. Poetry and Tom saved my life back at Sarah Lawrence, and it was the most impractical thing I could do with 3 young children to go and study and write poetry and study at Sarah Lawrence, but I did all right. So I'm happy to be here reading with him. I think I'll start with a poem from my new book called Earth Elegy, and it's kind of the theme of the book. And then maybe I'll read a few poems from Gloryland. Earth Elegy. By the time it fell, the tree was already part rot, eaten by termites and ants, stained with rain and urine, colonized. For years I watched from my kitchen as it ungathered in leaves and needles, bleached, dissolving, though I hardly noticed how the slow orgy of weather took it season after season into the pelvic trench of dirt. And I got used to seeing it pointing down the hill like a giant's fibrous arm, soft with fungus. We'd kick it to see the wood crumble, see the insects, horrible kinds, writhe out of its cracks. And once I read that our air is full of life we can't see, and thought of the sky falling with the falling tree, and disintegrating with the tree, a company of beings, billions, dying as we were dying, and other beings driving through the debris and living off it, the dying and dead together, unseen, spinning and tilted like us on our axis, pitched towards some ever place of crashing trees, ravenous creatures, the dirt lit with their living, dying backbones. Let me read something else from this book. We were hoping for some good weather here in Florida. Unfortunately, it's just not cold enough to go ice skating. But almost. Maybe tomorrow. It's still nice to be here, especially since we have our winter coats with us. Let me read a couple of poems from Gloryland. This book has a lot of Mary poems, and maybe I'll just read 2 of those. And I'll read the one that Mary quoted from, called Enunciation. If I can find it. Here it is. When I asked her how the world began, my mother's face went blank. I was very young, trying for the first time to see the universe as endless. All I saw was darkness swirling into itself. How could anything be endless? But how could it be contained? By what? All cosmos held in the crook of an elbow? There were no answers, though I thought the clouds were great wings trying to help me. and I thought my blood changed directions. What could I be but an echo, stranded here while the universe grows like a belly dense with stars? And I thought we were all orbiting inside that belly, and light could pass through me, but I wouldn't feel it. Years later, my son told me how he was conceived. He said he stood in a cloud and pointed at me, "I want her." Then put down his bow and arrow and came when my back was turned and entered through my shoulder blades. What I don't know is everything. Stars, sand, salt, dust, molecules, and atoms, and how they come scudding through the door full of news from distances I can't imagine. Someday I'll tell my sons the truth, that I knew they were coming, nothing I could see or even feel, but a sense sometimes that I was permeable, the cells inside me gathering and spreading. I hate to think of galaxy after galaxy, all matter burning up and shucked off, the endless signs of demise and change. I still can't grasp how anything at all can exist and what made the maker. And sometimes I'm choked with love and forget my own ignorance. Maybe just at that moment, light is pressing through a tree and reaching my window. And I am satisfied, joyful, though I know there's nothing there, just light, announcing itself, coming through. Well, let me read this poem. I wrote this, it's called Absence, and I wrote it when my kids were much younger and they were away at camp and I was missing them. And of course now I only have one left at home. I have 3 sons, and one of them is about to go off to college, so this has a whole new layer of meaning for me. There's a list in here of things that I was collecting in my head to tell them, and one of them is something about about bees finding their hives. And then I later learned that the person who told me this information was a bit of a liar, so I'm not sure that it's actually true. But it doesn't matter, it's a poem. Absence. Talking to the children's absence, you imagine them canoeing or sitting before a fire, sparks arcing like imitation stars. There's so much to say. Even in the unrelenting heat, the sun balanced overhead, while you collect facts for them as if they can hear you, how the barracuda's jaw can spread so wide, then thrash and rip into anything, how bees can't find their hive if it's moved more than a few inches, how your own house settles fraction by fraction into clay and river stone, and dust is alive, though you sweep it into piles, meaning the desert is a guest in the corner of your room, meaning your feet keep stirring clouds of creatures, and you pass over animal and plant and never feel the burden, or do feel the burden and bend like a sapling, like a heavy flower brushing the ground. This is what separation trains you for. You as an envelope releasing them, you ripping the cord, you with your stains on them, the ones you need 100 mirrors to see, the old goddess of tether and straw, the one who makes you to lie down, to be crushed till you come out oil of fish, oil of granite, come out ash and live in the fine grit under their feet, who licked you alive and left the taste in your own mouth, your own love, sand, ground tooth, spider, sawdust, hair, and adoration turning to powder, and absence teaching its teaching, and all you cannot say, you'll never say, swallowed, a coating inside lungs and all passageways, all orifices being the openings of absence, and what you want to say turns to air, but you try your prayer once more. Old goddess of rain, wash us with your silent tongue as if we were always just being born, slick and stunned, with our legs kicking. let me go back to my new book, She Heads into the Wilderness, which they weren't able to get here, and so you can always go find it or order it on Amazon. That's the worst thing I've ever done at a reading. But hey, a poet has to live. I have this new way, I think, that poets could make money, which is if we had, and you'll see after the next poem I read what I mean, but if we sold antidepressants with our books, I think there's a real meeting of commerce there, commerce and art and medicine. This is called American Tree Sparrow, Platte River, Nebraska. I have, my middle son is a birder and is studying to be an ornithologist. And a couple of years ago, I took him for spring break. He and my younger son, the three of us went to Nebraska. That's where everybody goes on spring break. I know you don't know that here in Florida. We went to Nebraska to see the spring migration, and we saw migration, and we did not see spring. There must be something about me. I come to Florida, it gets cold. I go to Nebraska, and there's a record-breaking snowstorm. I think in Nebraska, what is a record-breaking snowstorm? Is that like 100 feet of snow? Anyway, birders are never deterred. So we were out in the snow looking, through the binoculars, and the big boon of being out birding in a record-breaking snowstorm is that the small woodland birds couldn't find food, so they came out and would be on the side of the road kind of digging where the plow had plowed to find some seeds. So we got to see, besides all the cranes that we saw and the snow geese and these great birds, we got to see a lot of different kinds of sparrows. As Gertrude Stein said, a sparrow is a sparrow is a sparrow, but not to birders. Anyway, I'm totally off the subject. American tree sparrow, Platte River, Nebraska. Out here, hunger takes shape as a coyote crossing the white field or a crane dancing in the frozen corn stubs. There's no end to beaks stabbing ice, yellow legs, snipe, pintails, and hunkered together in the river, cranes by the thousands rising through the snow in one gray wave to forage bony fields. Even memories a kind of hunger, wanting to go back just once, as if this white scrim of a world could be lifted and the past in its fullness would be there behind this ashy afterlife, this snow-blotted landscape where sky and earth weld, no crack between them. When he holds out the bird in his open hand, dead on the roadside, car swiped, searching for food, I almost believe it could be quickened till he slowly spreads the fan of its wing, and I see how its rufous-capped head is twisted all wrong, how its eyes have no use for light. Who will feast on it when he lays it back on the snowbank? Who will rip its delicate breast? Brief fill for the hungry heart, brief fill for the hungry hole, brief passage through the secret place, brief life, fast death. Out here, the mother of beaks and talons is always eating, and I am like those starving birds, flashing their red bellies and yellow chests, flailing as anything approaches, crying, eat me, mother, for I feel useless some days in this life. Hook my throat. Wear the silk of my blood on your face. Tell me there was a reason more than hunger that drove me here. Then leave of me what's left, scattered on the roadside, for there are so many travelers, and they are forever hungry. last night, I think it was last night, Denise read a poem about about manatees. And I have a poem about their extinct cousins, the stellar sea cow, which is it was a much larger manatee. It was like a manatee, but much, much bigger, and it lived up in the Arctic. And it was recorded by Westerners, sailors who were stranded there, and within 30 years of their discovering this sea cow, it was extinct. So this is a poem for the sea cow, stellar sea cow. The first time and there's passenger pigeons in this poem, which, as you know, are extinct also. And the first time I read this poem, it was in this strange museum where they had stuffed animals everywhere, and right to my right there was a stuffed passenger pigeon. Even as they killed them to extinction, the sea cows drifted and swam in Arctic waters, unafraid of the stranded men. In the sea cow's parables, it was foretold that extinction comes into the mind before the body, a kingdom of oblivion to swim toward, like the last passenger pigeon perched in a zoo, forgetting how to fly, or a sea cow slaughtered and dragged to shore, the last of its kind in the frozen strait, toothless, spearless as the day it was made, but too big to hide. Now they are parables of themselves floating in the bloodstreams of humans who don't even know they are haunted, followed by the sea cows who watch them as clouds watch the ocean where the creatures lived, or by passenger pigeons who fly into memory, zigzagging overhead like invisible schools of fish. Come, children, the great mammals whisper. Find yourselves in the family of man among the giants of history. And she who writes about the lost sea cow, tell her the air she moves in is singed with extinction. We are waiting. Remember how we turned the other cheek. The world is never alone. It was never alone. Now for something depressing. I'm going to read a little bit from there's a middle section in this book that has 36 sonnets, and I won't bore you. I'll just read about 30 of them. Is that too many? They're a cycle, and they are kind of retelling of our creation myth, the story of the Garden of Eden. And so I'm not going to read that many of them, I promise, but I'll read a few. And I think I'll start right in the middle, which means you can't really follow the whole thing, but I'll just give you a taste of them. And I'm going to start with a paradise poem instead of, for once, I'm not going to start with the depressing poem. I'll start with the paradise poem, which is one that Mary read from, Wild Strawberries. If I can find it, here it is. And then I'll read a few others. The words were ambrosia, a bowl of wild strawberries. You said you knew where some grew and had picked them right in New York City, the size of red tears, vows of paradise, here in a bowl on the balcony. You said you knew where some grew and they were hidden and wild at the same time in the city, said you couldn't describe the taste, more like fragrance melting on the tongue, filling your head. You knew where they still grew, hidden, though we had a bowl of them then and there on a balcony overlooking the garden, wild strawberries, small pearls of forgetfulness in another country above a garden. In the beginning was the animal of space, licking earth to life, the night sky lit with great herds of stars and the paths of planets growing radiant, rubbing each other. Heavens thrust and caress upon us, green and fertile in the cracks, poultice of dust, spore, pollen, and ash, creation's luminous mouth. In the beginning, all that was made was good because it was made, and what was made and not made knew each other, and it was good. The stars in unending intercourse, heaven an amniosac, the slopping, salty center. From there, all the swimmers breaststroking, diving, all night long toward earth. These are all now toward the end of this cycle, and this is a winter poem. What I wake to in the layered winter bed and fall back into in the sling of sleep and walk around all day in and out of. Beneath the papery skin around my eyes, another life. Snow, gray and brittle. The sky sagging so low it might be a rag around my head. Thoughts, cold, sharp, dirty ice crackling at the edge of the walk, unrest inside, the unseen trying to stir the frozen underworld. I don't say it. The white roots inside me, winter glazed. I don't say it. And even when everything is at risk, sore with longing, I don't say it. And soon it carves a space inside me with its absence. We traveled as seeds and dust travel, by wind or bird spread to all corners. We were desire exhausting itself, a membrane shuddering. Was it accident brought us together? I remember you as I first saw you, bent over, studying something, just your back and the top of your head. I still see your shoulders hunch and hunger, your body like some great plant struggling from earth, and how to speak. Wasn't there a strange language, something deep from the dirt of our throats? Each day we try to wake up, but it's late now in the common story. We come from pollen tongue, spider weed, from the blue rib of sea, dropped here dreaming. I'll just read, I think I'll just read two more of these sonnets. And this one I wanted to write because I was doing this whole cycle and a reimagining of our story of the creation. I wanted to get Darwin in there. And I was writing this around the time of the something like 9 Republican candidates for president, and I think 7 of them or 5 of them didn't believe in evolution. And my son, who is studying evolution with his ornithology, was enraged and crazed, and so I started to read about Darwin, and I really sort of fell in love with him. He's a very human person. He struggled with this tremendously, and he was 5 years on the Beagle, right? Everybody knows that, but we don't know he was seasick for 5 years, and that's pretty incredible. And then he basically the last vestiges of his faith he lost when his favorite daughter died, Annie, and she's in this poem too. Darwin came seasick into paradise, packing the ship with crates of fossils, plants, dead birds, anything he could kill or dig up. 5 years collecting, 10 to sift through it all. And in the brain's bright cell, a viscous humming, the terrible doubts. Later, when the favored child died, when she moved through the first wilderness without him, Annie decomposing into chalky layers, no comfort, just hymns of transmutation, songs of barnacles, earthworms, finches, and the lonely tortoise. We are parasites, inside parasites, and some have wings. Annie, on shore, as he lurched seasick into paradise. And I'll just read the very last poem, which sort of brings us back to the beginning, if you had heard the beginning, which you didn't, but that's okay. She heads into the wilderness, weeping and stunned by shame, her eyes open, into another country, bent and becoming fibrous and heavy in her body, feeling that she is the tree, or that she is the fruit that ripens and falls, that falls and will keep falling her whole life, as if all that mattered was plummeting to earth and splitting open. And who hasn't stumbled out of herself into the body of suffering, into bare flesh, stooped shoulders, and the dark hole of the mouth? Threats still ringing, and that taste she never forgot, taste with no end, world with no end, gates fading, the wind shushing her on. And I'll end with a couple of poems from the end of the book. I'll just read two more. This is called The Bee's Coat, and I won't tell, the story behind it is longer than the poem, but I'll say I'll read it for my brother who's a beekeeper, among other things. That's one of the many things he does. People who get into bees really, really, really get into bees. And I've written a lot of bee poems, so I understand it. The bee's coat, wax and spit and hair, pollen to glow. Make me something to wear with room for wings. I want the splendor coat, wax, spit, and hair. Gold dust. It's not too late to burrow in the cup to chew and spin. A simple coat, pollen matted, trailing light. I want to shine in this world. And I'll end with the last poem in this book called My Lost Needle. Never had I desire to mend hems or dangling buttons, but tonight, though I can no longer easy aim the frayed end into the eye, though we squint, needle and I, at each other, and my hand trembles, yet feels true the needle between my fingers, the tether of thread as I pull it through red linen, just the right turn in my wrist, not too fast, thread rubbing the blouse, repeating, mend, mend, my dearest, hold fast, let me pat you, no one will know. You limp in my hand, draped on my lap, my other body. I with my warm, fine instrument, you undone, never whole without me. I would sew till the world around wore patches bright and uneven, sew my childhood back into my bones. I would bind what falls apart. My hand is happy, piercing, rising, circling back, taking me, thou needle, thou red thread, stitch to stitch, my way back, taking there, and I go. What more wanting? What more? Thank you so much. Thank you.